The first thing I noticed was the brass key lying on the porch. It was mine. Someone had placed it carefully on top of a folded sheet of paper, as though returning a borrowed item instead of stripping an old man of his home. I picked up the note and recognized my daughter-in-law's sharp handwriting immediately. "Robert, your key no longer works. Daniel and I have decided this arrangement is best for everyone. Please don't make this difficult." For several seconds, I simply stood there. My suitcase rested beside my leg. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the porch roof onto my shoulder, but I barely felt it. Then I looked up at the small black camera above the front door. Its blue light was blinking. They were watching me. My name is Robert Mercer. I was 74 years old when my daughter-in-law changed the locks on the house. My wife and I had spent 41 years building into a home. And when I say building, I don't mean we hired contractors and selected paint colors from a catalog. I mean I laid the hardwood flooring myself. My wife, Evelyn, painted every bedroom while carrying our son inside her. We planted the maple tree by the driveway when Daniel was born. We marked his height against the pantry door every birthday until he turned 16 and complained that it embarrassed him. Evelyn died 3 years before that rainy afternoon. The house was the last place where I could still hear her. Sometimes it was in the creak near the bedroom window. Sometimes it was in the wind chimes she had chosen at a roadside market during our 20th anniversary trip. That house was not an investment. It was 41 years of my life held together by timber, nails, and memory. Yet someone inside had decided I no longer belonged there. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked harder. "Daniel?" A curtain shifted in the upstairs window. Then it became still. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. For one foolish second, I hoped it was my son calling to explain everything. Instead, it was a message from his wife Claire. "We need boundaries. You have made living here impossible. Daniel agrees that you should stay somewhere else until we decide what happens next." Until they decided. I read those words twice. Claire had moved into my home 8 months earlier because she and Daniel had lost their rental after falling behind on payments. I had cleared the guest room, paid their overdue electricity bill, and told them they could remain as long as they needed. Apparently, gratitude had an expiration date. I called Daniel. He rejected the call. That hurt more than the lock. I looked through the narrow window beside the door and saw movement in the hallway. Claire crossed past wearing Evelyn's cream cardigan, the one I had kept in a cedar box since the funeral. She paused, turned toward me, and smiled. Not warmly, not nervously. She smiled like someone standing on the winning side of a closed door. That was the moment my confusion disappeared. Claire hadn't changed the locks during an argument. She had planned this. But what she didn't know was that the house was only the smallest thing she had tried to steal from me. And by the following morning, I would discover exactly how far her plan went. I didn't knock again. There was no point. When someone ignores you once, it can be an accident. When they ignore you 3 times while watching through the camera above the door, it's a choice. I picked up my overnight bag, walked back to my pickup truck, and sat behind the steering wheel without starting the engine. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. For nearly 15 minutes, I stared at the front porch where I had kissed Evelyn goodbye every morning before work. She always stood in that doorway wearing one of my oversized flannel shirts, coffee in one hand, waving until I reached the end of the street. Now the same doorway had become a wall between me and everything we had built together. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Claire. "Please don't create a scene in front of the neighbors. We all deserve peace." Peace. The word almost made me laugh. I had given them peace. 8 months earlier, Daniel called me late one Friday night. "Dad, I need help." His construction company had downsized. Claire's online design business wasn't bringing in enough money anymore. They were 3 months behind on rent and only days away from eviction. "I don't know what else to do." He sounded exhausted, ashamed. Without thinking twice, I told them to come home. Not because they asked. Because they were family. The following weekend, I emptied the guest bedroom, cleared half my garage so Daniel could store his tools, and even converted Evelyn's sewing room into a home office for Claire. She barely thanked me. Instead, she walked through every room with her phone, taking pictures. "The lighting in here is awful. The cabinets are ancient. We'll definitely have to update this place." I smiled politely. I thought she was simply trying to make herself comfortable. Looking back, I realized she wasn't making plans to live with me. She was making plans to replace me. The changes started slowly. First, Evelyn's photographs disappeared from the living room. Claire said the walls looked too cluttered. Then my favorite leather chair vanished into the basement because it didn't fit the aesthetic. Next came the kitchen. My cast iron pans were boxed up. The coffee beans I'd bought for years were replaced with expensive imported blends that somehow tasted like hot water. Even my dinner routine changed. Claire insisted everyone should eat together at exactly 7 o'clock. Except somehow, I was never told when dinner was ready. More than once, I walked into the kitchen to find empty plates already sitting in the sink. "Oh," Claire would say with fake surprise. "We thought you already ate." Daniel never corrected her. Never once. He simply lowered his eyes and washed another dish. I kept telling myself he was under pressure, that unemployment had changed him, that once things improved, my son would come back. Then one evening, I accidentally overheard a conversation I was never supposed to hear. Claire was speaking quietly in the dining room. If he moved into assisted living, we could renovate the entire first floor. Daniel answered so softly, I almost missed it. "He's not going anywhere." "Not if you keep feeling guilty," Claire replied. "You said this house would eventually be yours anyway." There was a long silence. Then she added the sentence that stayed with me for months. "We just have to speed the process up." I stood frozen in the hallway. They weren't discussing helping me. They were discussing replacing me. Still, I stayed. Because that's what fathers do. We convince ourselves tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow our children will remember who raised them. Tomorrow they'll realize what they're doing. Instead, tomorrow arrived with a new lock on my front door. Sitting in my truck that rainy afternoon, I finally accepted something Evelyn had warned me about years earlier. "Robert," she once told me, "kindness without boundaries teaches people to mistake love for permission." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I did. Completely. I wiped the rain from the windshield, started the engine, and drove toward the only person I trusted. Not my son. Not my neighbors. My attorney. Because while Claire believed changing the locks had ended the story, she had absolutely no idea whose name was written on every page that truly mattered. Margaret Ellis had been my attorney for 26 years. She wasn't the kind of lawyer who advertised on billboards or promised million-dollar settlements on television. She was calm, careful, and she remembered every document she'd ever prepared for me. When I walked into her office that afternoon carrying my overnight bag, she looked up from her desk and frowned. "Robert, I need your help." She didn't ask me to wait. She simply closed the folder she was reading and motioned toward the chair across from her. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't." I told her everything. The changed locks. The note. The unanswered phone calls. Claire watching me through the security camera while pretending nobody was home. Margaret never interrupted. She simply listened, occasionally writing something on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she folded her hands together. "First," she said, "I need to ask you something important." "Go ahead." "Whose names are on the deed?" "I never changed it after Evelyn passed. So, it's still only mine." She gave the smallest smile. I thought so. For the first time since Sunday morning, I felt my shoulders relax. "So they can't. They can't legally remove you from your own property." I closed my eyes. Not because I was relieved. Because I realized Claire already knew that. She hadn't acted out of ignorance. She'd acted because she believed I was too gentle to fight back. Margaret opened another file cabinet and removed a thick folder with my name printed across the tab. "There's something else you should know." She slid a document across the desk. It was the trust Evelyn and I had created 6 years before she died. I'd almost forgotten about it. After Evelyn's cancer diagnosis, we'd spent weeks making sure everything would be protected if something happened to one of us. Margaret tapped the final page. "Remember this clause?" I adjusted my glasses. Slowly, the words came back to me. "If any beneficiary attempts to force, manipulate, intimidate, or unlawfully remove the owner from his residence for financial gain, their inheritance could be immediately revoked." I stared at the page. I forgot we added that. Evelyn didn't. Margaret smiled softly. She insisted on it. A memory suddenly surfaced. We had been sitting at this very office. Evelyn squeezed my hand and laughed. You love Daniel too much to believe he'd ever make a terrible mistake. I raised him better than that, I'd answered. You did, she'd said. But people change when money gets involved. At the time, I thought she was worrying about nothing. Now her words echoed through my mind with painful clarity. Margaret leaned back in her chair. Robert, has your son threatened you before? No. Has Claire? I hesitated. Then I remembered dozens of little moments. Claire asking when I planned to retire completely. Claire suggesting I sell the house because it was too much for one old man. Claire encouraging me to move into one of those luxury retirement communities she'd conveniently been researching online. At the time, every suggestion sounded reasonable. Now they formed a pattern. None of this had started with changing the locks. That had only been the final move. Margaret looked directly at me. I believe they expected you to leave quietly. I almost did. She nodded. Good thing you came here instead. Then she reached for the phone. I know a locksmith who can meet us tomorrow morning. I frowned. A locksmith? She smiled again. Robert, they change your locks without permission. We're simply going to restore your property. A strange feeling spread through my chest. Not revenge. Not anger. Something I hadn't felt in months. Confidence. Claire believed she'd won because she had locked an old man outside. She never considered that old men sometimes have lawyers who helped build every legal protection years before anyone imagined betrayal. As I stood to leave, Margaret handed me a single envelope. What's this? Copies of every document proving ownership. I slipped them into my jacket. Tomorrow morning, I wasn't going back to ask for my home. I was going back to reclaim it. And Claire was about to discover that changing the locks was the biggest mistake she had ever made. I barely slept that night. Margaret had booked me into a small motel 10 minutes from the house. The room was clean enough. Fresh sheets. A humming air conditioner. A television mounted on the wall. But none of it felt familiar. At 2 a.m, I found myself staring at the ceiling, thinking about the first night Evelyn and I spent in our house. We didn't even own a proper bed then. Just a mattress on the floor and 2 lawn chairs in the living room. We ate hamburgers sitting on upside-down moving boxes and laughed because the kitchen light flickered every few minutes. This place is perfect, Evelyn had whispered. It will be. She always corrected herself that way. She never saw people or places for what they were. She saw what they could become. That house became our entire life. Daniel took his first steps across those hardwood floors. His high school graduation photos were taken beneath the maple tree in the front yard. Every Christmas morning for 38 years began in that living room. And somehow, my own son had allowed someone to lock me out of all of it. By 6:30 the next morning, I was standing across the street with Margaret. The neighborhood was quiet. Only a few birds and the distant sound of lawn sprinklers interrupted the silence. A white locksmith van pulled into the driveway. The driver stepped out. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s named Frank Donovan. Margaret had worked with him for years. He shook my hand firmly. Morning, Mr. Mercer. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. So do I. Margaret handed him a copy of my property deed. Frank studied it for less than a minute before nodding. Everything checks out. Then he looked at me. Ready? I looked toward the house. The curtains were still closed. Claire always slept late. Daniel usually left for temporary construction jobs before 7. If we were lucky, neither of them would notice until everything was finished. I nodded. Frank opened his toolbox. Within minutes, the shiny electronic deadbolt Claire had installed was lying in pieces on the porch. You know, Frank said while fitting a new brass lock into place, people think changing locks makes them owners. He tightened one final screw. It doesn't. At exactly 7:22, he handed me 2 brand new keys. I stared at them for a second. The weight felt strangely familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend. Margaret smiled. Go home. Home. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear that word. The front door opened smoothly. The familiar scent of cedar, furniture polish, and old books greeted me. For one beautiful second, everything felt normal again. Then I noticed what Claire had done. The living room looked like a luxury furniture showroom. Evelyn's handmade quilt had disappeared. Our family photographs had been replaced with oversized abstract paintings. The antique clock my father built was gone. Even the piano Daniel learned to play as a child had vanished. Panic rose inside me. I hurried from room to room. My workshop had been turned into a home gym. My wife's sewing room was now painted bright white with shelves full of Claire's office supplies. The master bedroom no longer looked like ours. Every trace of Evelyn had been erased, as though 41 years of marriage had never happened. I opened closet after closet. Finally, in the basement storage room, I found everything. The photographs, the quilt, the clock, boxes labeled old decorations, another marked Robert's things, and one final box that made my blood run cold. Written in Claire's handwriting were 3 words. Donate after summer. Not store. Not keep. Donate. She wasn't planning for me to come back. She was planning for me to disappear permanently. I stood there, gripping the edge of the box, until my knuckles turned white. Behind me, Margaret quietly spoke. Robert. I couldn't answer, because, sitting on top of that box, was Evelyn's wedding dress, still sealed in the preservation case we'd bought 39 years earlier. Claire had written a yellow sticky note across the plastic. Sell online. Vintage wedding dress. In that moment, something inside me finally broke. Not into anger. Into certainty. Claire hadn't just taken my home. She had been preparing to sell my family's history piece by piece. And she was about to walk through the front door, expecting everything to belong to her. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. Margaret gently placed the wedding dress back inside its preservation box. Robert, she said quietly, let's not touch anything else. I looked at her. Why? Because if this becomes a legal matter, photographs will tell a much stronger story than memories. She pulled out her phone and began documenting everything. Every labeled box. Every missing family photograph. Every piece of furniture Claire had replaced. The sticky note that read sell online. She photographed it all. Only then did I realize something. Claire had been so confident I would never come back, that she hadn't even bothered hiding her plans. She believed the story was already over. Margaret was still taking pictures when we heard the garage door opening. I checked my watch. 8:13. Daniel always left around 8 on Tuesdays. Except, the engine shut off. Footsteps echoed through the house. They're home, I whispered. Margaret calmly slipped her phone into her purse. Good. I stared at her. Good? She nodded. Much better than sending letters. The front door opened. Claire walked inside carrying 2 shopping bags and an iced coffee. She froze the instant she saw me standing in the hallway. The color drained from her face. For just a heartbeat, she actually looked frightened. Then her confidence returned. What are you doing here? I answered calmly. I live here. Her eyes shifted toward the new brass deadbolt. What happened to the lock? I replaced it. You had no right. Margaret stepped forward before I could respond. My client is the sole legal owner of this property. Claire blinked. I'm sorry, who are you? Margaret Ellis. She handed Claire a business card. Mr. Mercer's attorney. Claire's expression changed again. The confidence she'd worn so easily suddenly looked forced. This is a misunderstanding, she said quickly. We only changed the lock because Robert kept forgetting his key. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I forgot my key? She nodded. It was for your safety. My safety? I repeated. You left me outside in the rain. You could have called. I did. You ignored every call. Claire opened her mouth, but no words came out. At that exact moment, Daniel walked in through the garage carrying a toolbox. He stopped so suddenly the toolbox slipped from his hand and crashed onto the floor. Dad. His voice was barely above a whisper. He looked from me, to Margaret, to the boxes in the basement, then finally to Claire. What happened? Claire answered before I could. Your father broke into the house. Margaret didn't even let the sentence finish. No. She held up the property deed. He entered his own residence. Daniel stared at the document. I watched every emotion pass across his face. Confusion, fear, embarrassment, then guilt. Real guilt. He looked at me for the first time since this nightmare began. Dad. I didn't think she'd actually. He stopped talking. Claire spun toward him. What are you doing? He ignored her. Instead, He looked around the room. His eyes landed on the wedding dress, the family photographs, the donation boxes. Slowly, his face changed. What is all this? Claire folded her arms. I was organizing. Daniel picked up one of the boxes. He read the label aloud. Donate after summer. Then he opened another. Inside were Evelyn's photo albums. Another contained my military medals. Another held the wooden toys I had carved for Daniel when he was 5 years old. He turned toward Claire. You said Dad wanted all this stored. I was going to store it. With the donation label? She hesitated. It was only temporary. Daniel wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me. And for the first time in months, he saw exactly what I had lost. The silence in that basement felt heavier than concrete. Then Claire did something that surprised every one of us. She smiled. Not because she was happy. Because she believed she still had one final move left. You can have the house, she said coldly. But let's see what happens when everyone finds out how you threw your own son onto the street. She thought public sympathy would save her. She had no idea Margaret had already anticipated that move too. And the envelope sitting inside her briefcase was about to destroy the last piece of Claire's carefully built story. Claire had always been good at controlling the story. It was one of the first things I noticed about her. If she arrived late to dinner, it wasn't because she'd lost track of time. It was because traffic had been terrible. If she forgot someone's birthday, it wasn't forgetfulness. It was because she was overwhelmed with work. Nothing was ever her fault. There was always a version of events where she became the victim. Standing in my basement, I realized she was trying the same strategy again. You can have the house, she repeated, folding her arms, but everyone will know you forced your own son and daughter-in-law onto the street. Margaret didn't react. Instead, she calmly opened her briefcase and removed a thick manila envelope. I was hoping you would say something like that. Claire frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Margaret spread several papers across the dining room table. Phone records, bank statements, property documents. Then she placed several printed photographs beside them. Claire's confident smile disappeared. What are those? The evidence your father-in-law asked me to preserve this morning. Daniel stepped closer. His eyes widened as he looked at the photographs. Every box, every label, every family heirloom packed away, every sticky note. Then Margaret slid another sheet toward him. This is the deed to the property. Daniel looked at the signature. My father's. Correct. The house belongs entirely to Mr. Mercer. Claire interrupted. We already know that. No, Margaret replied. I don't think you do. She opened the trust agreement to the highlighted page. This document was signed 6 years ago. Daniel silently read the paragraph. His face turned pale. What does this mean? It means, Margaret answered, that anyone who attempts to manipulate or unlawfully remove Mr. Mercer from his residence forfeits any inheritance connected to this estate. Claire laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. It is legally enforceable. The room fell silent. Then Claire looked at Daniel. She's bluffing. Margaret slowly slid one final document across the table. It carried the seal of the county recorder's office. No bluff. Daniel looked from the document. To me, Dad. His voice cracked. You never told me. I never thought I'd have to. He sat heavily in one of the dining chairs. I didn't know. Claire immediately stepped beside him. Daniel, don't let them manipulate you. He looked at her. Manipulate me? She nodded. They're trying to turn you against me. He stared at the donation boxes. The wedding dress. The photo albums. My toys. My mother's things. His voice became harder with every sentence. You told me Dad wanted everything stored. Claire crossed her arms. I was making space. You wrote donate after summer. It was only a reminder. A reminder to donate my mother's memories. For the first time since they'd arrived, Claire didn't have an answer. Daniel slowly walked into the living room. He looked around as though seeing the house for the first time. The modern paintings. The missing family portraits. The expensive furniture Claire had ordered. Then he opened the hall closet. Inside sat several black trash bags. He untied one. My clothes. Folded carelessly beside old shoes and cleaning supplies. Another bag contained Evelyn's knitting basket. A third held framed family photographs wrapped in newspaper. He turned back toward Claire. When were you planning to tell me about these? You told me Dad packed everything himself. I thought. You lied. The word echoed through the house. Claire's eyes filled with frustration rather than tears. Fine. I moved a few things. You've been depressed ever since your mother died. I was trying to help. No, Daniel said quietly. You were trying to erase him. I watched my son struggle with the truth. The boy I had raised was still in there somewhere, buried beneath months of excuses and manipulation. Then he looked directly at me. I'm sorry, Dad. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was the first honest sentence I'd heard from him in almost a year. Before I could answer, Claire grabbed her purse. If you're going to believe this nonsense, I'm leaving. She headed toward the front door. Margaret didn't try to stop her. Neither did I. Because by then, the damage she had done wasn't measured by the house anymore. It was measured by the marriage she had just started losing. And neither she nor Daniel had yet discovered the financial secret Evelyn and I had kept hidden for years. Daniel sat at the kitchen table long after Claire slammed the front door behind her. Neither of us tried to stop her. The silence she left behind felt heavier than her shouting ever had. He rubbed both hands across his face. I don't even know when everything changed. I poured 2 cups of coffee. Real coffee. The same blend Evelyn and I had bought for nearly 30 years. I set 1 cup in front of him. He stared at it for several seconds. I haven't smelled this in months. Claire said it upset her stomach. I smiled sadly. Claire said a lot of things. For the first time that morning, Daniel gave a weak, embarrassed laugh. Then the laugh disappeared. Dad, I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. No, you should have watched. He looked confused. When people truly love someone, they don't just listen to what they're told. They pay attention. They notice. You stopped noticing. His eyes dropped to the floor. You were right. No, I was blind. He looked around the kitchen. My mother's curtains. Gone. The dining table? In storage. The clock Grandpa built? Basement. Every answer made his shoulders sink a little lower. Then he quietly asked the question I had been waiting for. Did Claire really want to sell Mom's wedding dress? I think she did. His eyes filled with tears. She told me she was preserving everything. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. Daniel, I need to ask you something. He nodded. When your wife convinced you to change the locks, whose idea was it? He hesitated. Then he answered honestly. Hers. Did you agree? He swallowed hard. I didn't stop her. That's different. Margaret wrote something in her notebook. Did she ever tell you why she wanted your father out of the house? Daniel looked uncomfortable. She said. He stopped. What? She said Dad was lonely. I almost laughed. Lonely? She said moving into assisted living would give you friends your own age. Margaret remained silent. Daniel continued. She already had brochures. She'd visited 3 different retirement communities. She even scheduled appointments. I looked at him. When? Months ago. Months. While I was cooking dinner, fixing broken cabinet doors, paying the property taxes. She had already been planning where to send me. Daniel shook his head. I honestly believe she was trying to help. Then something seemed to occur to him. His face suddenly changed. Oh no. What? My laptop. He rushed upstairs. A minute later he came back carrying it. He opened several folders. His expression became darker with every click. Claire. What is it? I asked. He turned the screen toward us. There were dozens of bookmarked websites. Luxury homes. Real estate agents. Property valuation calculators. Mortgage pre-approval forms. Then one spreadsheet. Across the top it read, Future financial plan. Below that, one line froze the room. Sell Robert's house. Estimated value, $80,65,000. Another line beneath it. Use proceeds to purchase dream home. My name wasn't Dad. It wasn't Robert Mercer. It was simply an asset. Daniel's hands began shaking. I've never seen this. He opened another document. This one was even worse. It contained renovation plans for my house. The master bedroom had already been renamed. Claire and Daniel's suite. My workshop. Home theater. Evelyn's garden. Swimming pool proposal. My life had been redesigned on a spreadsheet, without anyone asking whether I intended to keep living it. Daniel slowly closed the laptop. I married someone I don't recognize. Margaret stood. Robert, I believe we've now established intent. I looked at her. What happens now? She smiled. Now, we protect everything. But before she could explain her plan, someone pounded violently on the front door. Not knock. Pounded. The windows rattled. Claire's voice echoed through the house. Daniel, you need to come outside right now. None of us moved. Then came another voice. A man's voice. County Sheriff's Office. My heart skipped a beat. Claire hadn't come back alone. And whatever story she had told the police, she was betting they would believe her before they believed me. The pounding continued. 3 heavy knocks. Then silence. Then 3 more. Margaret looked at me calmly. Robert, may I? I nodded. She opened the front door. A sheriff's deputy stood on the porch beside Claire. Claire's makeup was smudged, her breathing uneven, as if she'd been crying. I'd seen enough of her performances to know the tears could disappear the moment they were no longer useful. The deputy removed his hat politely. Good morning, sir. Morning. I'm Deputy Collins. We received a report that an elderly gentleman forced his way into a residence and was threatening the occupants. Before I could answer, Claire stepped forward dramatically. That's him. He broke in while we were gone. He changed the locks. He threw us out. Margaret didn't even look at her. Instead, she handed Deputy Collins a folder. My client anticipated there might be some confusion. Inside were copies of the deed, property tax records, identification, the trust agreement, and the locksmith's invoice from that very morning. The deputy spent nearly 2 minutes reading everything. Claire shifted impatiently. Well, he finally looked up. Ma'am, this house belongs to Mr. Robert Mercer. Claire forced a smile. I know that technically. There is no technically. The deputy's tone became firmer. He is the sole legal owner. She pointed toward Daniel. My husband lives here. Daniel slowly stepped onto the porch. No, he said quietly. I lived here. Claire stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying. He took a deep breath. My father didn't throw us out. We tried to force him out. The deputy looked between us. Is that true? Daniel nodded. We changed the locks while my father was away. Claire grabbed his arm. Daniel, stop talking. He gently pulled away. No, I've done enough of that. The deputy sighed. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to collect your belongings peacefully. Claire laughed. You can't be serious. I am. This is my home. No, it isn't. Her entire expression changed. Gone was the polished confidence. Gone was the carefully controlled smile. Only anger remained. She pointed directly at me. You planned this. You wanted Daniel to hate me. I answered quietly. No. You managed that on your own. She stared at me with pure disbelief. People like Claire never expect consequences. They believe confidence is the same thing as being right. They mistake silence for weakness, and kindness for surrender. The deputy cleared his throat. Mrs. Mercer, if you refuse to leave voluntarily, this situation becomes much more complicated. For nearly 30 seconds she said nothing. Then, without another word, she marched upstairs. The sound of drawers opening and slamming echoed through the house. Daniel looked exhausted. I'll help her pack. I placed a hand on his shoulder. No, you've helped enough. He lowered his head. An hour later, Claire carried the last suitcase onto the porch. She didn't look at me. She looked at the house. The house she had already imagined selling. The house she had already redesigned. The house she believed she would own. Before getting into her car, she turned toward Daniel. So, you're choosing him? Daniel answered without hesitation. I'm choosing the truth. She waited for him to change his mind. He didn't. She climbed into her car, slammed the door, and drove away so fast the tires threw gravel across the driveway. The neighborhood became quiet again. For the first time in months, it felt like my home. I thought everything was finally over. I was wrong. Because 3 days later, Margaret called with news that shocked even her. Claire hadn't only tried to take my house. She had secretly taken out loans, using documents she had no legal right to possess. And that discovery was about to cost her far more than a marriage. 3 days after Claire left, the house finally felt like a home again. Daniel and I spent those days putting everything back where it belonged. We carried Evelyn's piano into the living room together. We rehung every family photograph exactly where it had been. He even insisted on moving my old leather chair back to its place beside the fireplace. Neither of us talked much. Sometimes healing begins in silence. On Thursday morning, Margaret called. "Robert, I found something." Her voice was unusually serious. "What happened?" "I need you and Daniel to come to my office." When we arrived, several folders were already spread across the conference table. Margaret looked at both of us before speaking. I started reviewing the paperwork Claire handled during the past year. Daniel frowned. "What paperwork?" "Insurance renewals, property tax correspondence, mail forwarding requests, utility account updates." She slid one document across the table. "I discovered someone requested certified copies of your property records." Daniel looked confused. "So?" Margaret placed another document beside it, then another. Each one made less sense than the last. Applications, loan inquiries, financial disclosures. Finally, she placed a mortgage application in front of us. The borrower section listed 2 names, Daniel Mercer, Claire Mercer. The collateral section listed only one property, my house. Daniel stared at the page. "I never signed this." Margaret nodded. "I know. Look closely." He examined the signature. "It looks like mine." "It isn't." It was traced. The room became completely silent. Margaret continued. "The application was rejected because Claire couldn't produce the original deed." She opened another folder. But she didn't stop there. Inside were emails between Claire and a real estate investor. One message read, "Current owner is elderly. Transfer should happen soon. Preparing property for sale now." Daniel pushed his chair back. "No." Margaret handed him another printed email. "Once ownership changes, we'll renovate immediately and relist above market value." There it was, in black and white. Claire hadn't simply wanted a nicer house. She had built an entire future around selling mine. Daniel covered his face with both hands. "I can't believe this." Neither could I. Not because of the money. Because every kind thing I'd done had become another step in someone else's business plan. Then Margaret opened the final folder. "This one concerns me the most." Inside were copies of identification documents, my driver's license, property tax statements, insurance papers, documents I had never given Claire permission to use. "Where did she get these?" I asked. Daniel answered quietly. "My filing cabinet." He looked sick. "She offered to organize all our paperwork." I remembered. She had spent an entire weekend sorting documents into color-coded folders. I thought she was being thoughtful. She had actually been collecting information. Margaret folded her hands. "Robert, what Claire attempted may involve document fraud and identity-related offenses." Daniel looked stunned. "Criminal charges?" "If law enforcement determines the evidence supports them." He sat silently for a long time. Finally he whispered, "She wasn't trying to build a family. She was building an exit plan." Margaret nodded. "One financed by your father's house." A deep sadness settled over the room. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just sadness. Because greed rarely appears overnight. It grows quietly. One compromise. One excuse. One lie at a time. Before leaving, Margaret handed me a revised copy of my estate documents. "I've updated everything exactly as you requested." Daniel looked surprised. "You changed your will?" I looked at my son. "I changed who has to earn it." He lowered his eyes but nodded. "I understand." That evening we drove back home together. For the first time in nearly a year. Daniel parked in the driveway, then stopped. "Dad, if you'll let me, I'd like to stay. Not because I need a place to live. Because I want to help fix everything I helped break." I looked at the house, then at my son. Some wounds never disappear. But forgiveness doesn't begin with perfect words. It begins with honest actions. I unlocked the front door. Come inside. Neither of us noticed the woman sitting in the car across the street. Watching. Waiting. Claire wasn't finished yet, and her final mistake would become the one that changed every remaining part of her life. Claire didn't wait long. The very next afternoon, Margaret called again. Robert. Turn on the television. I reached for the remote. A local news station was running a short segment about rising housing costs. Then the reporter said something that made my stomach tighten. A local woman claimed she and her husband were forced out of their home by an elderly relative. A photograph of Claire appeared on the screen. She looked exhausted. Fragile. Heartbroken. It was the same performance she'd tried on the sheriff. Except now, she had an audience. Our lives were turned upside down overnight, she told the camera. We only wanted to care for him. We loved him. He became confused after losing his wife. She even paused to wipe away a tear. If anyone deserves sympathy, she whispered, it's him. The reporter never questioned her story. Why would they? She sounded convincing. Within an hour, neighbors began calling. Some asked if I was all right. Others were less kind. One anonymous message simply read, how could you throw your own children out? I switched the phone off. Daniel looked sick. I can't believe she'd do this. I can, Margaret replied. People who lose privately often try to win publicly. She wasn't angry. She sounded prepared. Do we respond? I asked. Not yet. She smiled. Truth works best when supported by evidence. The following morning, Margaret held a press conference outside her office. Not a dramatic one. No shouting. No accusations. Just facts. She displayed the property deed, the trust documents, the locksmith's invoice, the sheriff's incident report. Then, with Daniel standing beside me, she invited him to speak. He stepped toward the microphones. His hands trembled. My name is Daniel Mercer. The homeowner everyone is talking about is my father. I allowed my wife to convince me that changing his locks was acceptable. It wasn't. My father never abandoned us. He opened his home when we had nowhere else to go. He paid our bills. He fed us. And we repaid him by trying to take away the only place that still reminded him of my mother. The reporters stopped writing. Every camera focused on Daniel. I failed my father. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. There wasn't a single dramatic tear. No rehearsed speech. Just truth. And somehow, truth carried farther than performance ever could. That afternoon, the television station aired a correction. Then another. By evening, the same people criticizing me online had started apologizing. Some even left flowers on my porch. Not because I needed flowers. Because people finally understood what had really happened. 2 weeks later, Margaret called one last time. The investigation is finished. I held my breath. And? Claire accepted a plea agreement related to the fraudulent documents. She'll also be responsible for restitution and legal penalties. Daniel closed his eyes. Not with relief, with heartbreak. The marriage officially ended several months later. He moved into a small apartment across town. Not because I asked him to leave. Because he believed rebuilding trust required earning it. Every Saturday morning, he came over. Sometimes we repaired furniture together. Sometimes we worked in Evelyn's garden. Sometimes we simply drank coffee on the porch where she used to wave goodbye every morning. One afternoon, he handed me a small wooden box. I made it. Inside was a brass key, mounted beneath a glass cover. A tiny engraved plate read, "Home belongs to those who protect it." I smiled. No, I told him. It belongs to those who respect it. He nodded. I finally understand the difference. Today, when I lock my front door each night, I don't think about Claire anymore. I think about Evelyn, about promises, about boundaries, about the painful lesson that love without respect eventually becomes permission for someone to take everything you have. Changing the locks didn't make Claire the owner of my home. It simply revealed the kind of person she had always been. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't getting revenge. It's refusing to surrender the life you spent decades building. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next story.